Hey guys, I've been talking a lot about Crimea's history recently. You know, the one where Russia repeatedly lied and then massacred Crimeans. And today I'm going to talk about Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. I know, Russia was forced to do it because of the Minsk agreements that happened the year after Russia annexed Crimea, and also because of Russia's war in Donbas, which also started after Russia annexation of Crimea. That's right, Russia has the power of knowing the future, which is why they can use the war they started and funded in Donbas and agreements from the future to justify their annexation of Crimea. Incredible, right? Oh, for the Vatnik scum watching this is sarcasm. You're fucking morons, and people who listen to you even more moronic, which apparently is possible, though I don't know how. In previous videos, we talked about the history of the peninsula and the Crimean Tatars. If you haven't seen those yet, I encourage you to watch them as it gives a background into Crimea. And of course, Russian bullshit. I will leave a link in the description of this video so you can find them. Okay, so in order for you to better understand the context, we need to become familiar with some details related to the ethnic composition of the population, the strategic significance of the peninsula, and the loyalty of a significant portion of the local population of the Russian Federation. You know, that local population that Russia has been ethnically cleansing throughout history. Joseph Stalin understood how various ethnic minorities who shared religious and nation-building views could be dangerous for his definitely awesome and not evil dictatorial regime. In May 1944, the deportation of the Crimean Tatars began, where they were forcibly removed from the peninsula and were consciously subjected to inhumane living conditions. The reason for the deportation was supposedly that many units formed by Crimean Tatars collaborated with the Nazis. Thus, an entire nation was punished for the actions of a few. According to a self-census conducted by the National Movement of Crimean Tatars, over 400,000 Crimean Tatars were deported, and during the relocation and the first years of living in new territories, approximately one-third of entire population died. Now, the cynicism of the situation lay in the fact that many Crimean Tatars gave their lives to defend their country on the front lines of the Second World War in the fight against Nazism. So, basically, the opposite of what Stalin said. Weird seems like the saying that don't believe it until the Kremlin denies it. It was valid even in Stalin's times. After Stalin's death, the so-called Khrushchev's thaw began, and many directives regarding the deportation of various ethnic groups were cancelled. However, the directive concerning the Crimean Tatars was not cancelled, and they were only able to return home after 1989. Guys, if at this point you haven't hit that subscribe button, what are you doing? Anyway, a logical question arises. Who replaced the Crimean Tatars? Who began to rebuild the peninsula after the Second World War? The ethnic composition of the peninsula has always been very diverse. Ukrainians, Russian Tatars, Greeks, Armenians, Romanians, and many other nationalities were all Crimean. But traditionally, the top three largest ethnic groups on the peninsula were Tatars, Ukrainians, and Russians. After the deportation of the Tatars, Russians began to be resettled in large number on the peninsula, thus creating an advantage of one ethnic group over other. After Stalin's death, people of various professions began to arrive on the peninsula, receiving directions to work specifically in Crimea, including military personnel who served in the army and military retirees. Therefore, as of 1989, the largest ethnic group by number was Russian, followed by Ukrainians, and only then did Tatars and other ethnic groups follow. Despite the diverse population, which had very different views on the future existence of the peninsula, in all-Ukrainian referendum on December 1st, 1991, over 54% of Crimeans supported Ukraine's state independence. Crimea became a holiday destination for Ukrainians and Russians who, in addition to attractive prices, had the opportunity to communicate freely in Russian and use all available services without problems. Russian channels were broadcasted on television screens, and many locals had relatives in Russia. Also, let's not forget that Ukraine actually leased Sevastopol port to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union to make it base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Another separate issue was the strategic location of the peninsula. Even during the Soviet Union, Crimea was the base of the Black Sea Fleet with a large number of vessels of various purposes. After the collapse of the Union, the problem of dividing the fleet arose, which led to the Crimean crisis of 1990–94. However, this topic deserves a separate video, so please let me know in comments if you would like to see a video about Crimea and the Black Sea Fleet. Everything you need to know as a result of the so-called Kharkiv Agreement signed by Presidents Yanukovych and Medvedev on April 21, 2010 was that the term of presence of the Russian Black Sea Fleet was extended from 2017 to 2042. Ukraine received cheap Ukrainian gas in return for this. And if you thought across your mind that Ukraine traded its security for discounts, you would be absolutely right. Now let's go back to the end of 2013, before the start of the Revolution of Dignity. You know, that one where the Yanukovych promised to grow closer ties with the EU, but then stabbed his own country in the back and tried to sell it to the Russians. And I will try to briefly describe the situation on the peninsula at that time. We have an autonomous republic with its own parliament and a diverse population, among whom there are strong pro-Russian sentiments. In Sevastopol there is a base of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet, but overall the situation is quite stable. And then the Revolution of Dignity begins. There is no point in recounting the course of the revolution to you, as you already know it well. But it was because of the political instability within Ukraine that the Russian Federation would use as a justification for the annexation of Crimea. Now, one can talk a lot about pro-Russian lobby in Crimea, covert agents and so on, but the main driving force behind the annexation was Russian soldiers who invaded the peninsula without identifying insignia and became known worldwide as Little Green Men. The official date of the invasion is considered to be February 20, 2014. This date was chosen not by chance, as at this time Yanukovych was preparing to flee the country, thus creating a power vacuum, which was immediately filled by local separatists led by Sergei Aksyonov. Now, you also need to know, before this point, there was no majority, or in fact serious minority, who wanted to separate from Ukraine. But Russia doesn't let facts get in the way of its lies. On the other hand, since the beginning of the Revolution of Dignity, fake news about the junta, Nazis and Bandera supporters who carried out a coup against the legitimate government was being broadcasted on Russian television. The average Russian citizen was given a false idea about the course of events during the Ukrainian Revolution. It is also important not to forget the fact that the annexation of Crimea was presented to Russian citizens as a great victory which raised Putin's political rating. Therefore, local separatists in Crimea under Kremlin's control turned to Putin with a request to protect them from the bloody regime of Kiev terrorists who had seized power in the country. It was at this time that incredible fake stories appeared about trains filled with Bandera supporters who were coming to kill innocent Crimeans, and only the Russian armies could save them. Apart from being monstrous lies, as our favorite Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov would say, it's also laughable. Russian army save anyone? Save from them now? By doing what they did to Mariupol, or Bucha, or Irpin, or Kherson, or Bakhmut? You get the picture, huh? Now, you may have another logical question. What was the Ukrainian government and army doing at this time? Well, after Yanukovych fled, Alexander Turchinov began to perform the duties of the president, and even now no one can accurately understand why the government behaved so immaturely, limiting itself to half-measured and calling on commanders of units stationed in Crimea to not be provoked. As for the question of the actions of the Ukrainian army, everything is very simple here. Recall the first part of the video in which the ethnic composition of the peninsular's population was discussed. The army was demoralized, did not have significant combat readiness, and units in Crimea were largely filled with Russians. And on the top of that, the government was not providing clear instructions. To better understand the situation, about 50% of the army and navy stationed in Crimea went over to Russian side. This is why when units of the Ukrainian armed forces began to be moved towards the peninsula from the mainland, everything was already over, and unfortunately not in our favor. In addition, our army lacked proper equipment and functioning machinery. If we focus on a specific date, then on March 16, 2014, a so-called referendum was held in Crimea, after which the Crimean Peninsula was definitely annexed, because the Russians held a totally open and fair referendum and definitely did not threaten people. To be honest, I need to point out that many of the local population's attitude towards the occupation supported separatism, but there were many pro-Ukrainian citizens, and this number only increased after 2014, as the local population began to fully understand what the Russian Federation is, where laws do not work and freedom of speech is suppressed. Guys, what do you know about occupation of Crimea in 2014? Please let me know in comment under this video. We have already discussed the issue with the Ukrainian army and politics at that time, but we need to discuss the reaction of the international community. In short, all the world organization condemned Russia's action and expressed their concern. And yeah, this is sarcasm. Of course, Russia was subjected to certain sanctions, but comparing to them with the current sanctions is just ridiculous. And the international reaction was underwhelming at best. And since there wasn't actually a full-scale war, the issue of Crimea was sidelined after the start of the undeclared war in Donbas. Of course, the results of the so-called referendum were not recognized by anyone in the civilized world, but no decisions on the deoccupation of Crimea appeared until February 24, 2022. Today, Crimea remains a temporary occupied territory waiting to be liberated from Russia. With the start of the full-scale invasion in Crimea, the cotton started to sound, and a significant portion of Russians who settled in the peninsula after 2014 left it quickly, selling their properties to I don't know who, but they somehow did it and do it anyway. In fact, the Russians are so confident of their victory in the 3-day special military operation that the Russians are digging trenches and building fortifications in Crimea, and definitely not planning any reward advancement anytime soon. On a more serious note, I, like most Ukrainians, sincerely believe that in due time Crimea will be deoccupied and our beautiful blue and yellow flag will fly over it. Okay guys, if you like this video, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you like my videos, consider becoming my Patreon or getting me some coffee so I can keep improving these videos for you. The links are in description below. See you in the next video, and Slava Ukraini!